With that, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight. Chris is, excuse me, he earned a bachelor's of architecture from the University of Arkansas. He received his traveling fellowships to study internationally in Rome and Mexico City. And after completing those studies, he worked in several internationally recognized design practices, including Marlin Blackwell Architects and Allied Works, where he led numerous significant civic, institutional, and residential projects. As a founding partner of Linden Brown Architecture, Chris brings his extensive experience and sensitive design approach to every project, creating thoughtful spaces with tactile, excuse me, materials and abundant natural light. Chris also teaches graduate design studios at the University of Oregon School of Architecture and Environment, serves on design juries, and is a member of the Professional Advisory Board at the University of Arkansas Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design. Welcome, Chris Brown, and thank you very much in advance for your presentation.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. We're really excited to be able to talk in more detail about the project, the Gradient House and Studio, and this really, appreciate this series to give a forum for that, being able to describe the projects and the sort of the process and all of the sort of components that go into the work that then gets resultant in the beautiful photography that can win awards. So thanks so much for having me tonight to be able to share the work. I will go ahead and share my screen here and get full screen. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm Chris Brown of Linden Brown. We're a small practice here in Portland, Oregon, that I have with my partner, Brent Linden, and we have been working together for a number of years, started at our time at Allied Works, and then we forged this practice coming out of that. And so today I'm going to focus on the Gradient House and Studio, as I mentioned, which is a really interesting project for us. It was very early on in our practice, and it was an opportunity for us to be able to express a variety of different ideas through a design process, and through our love of building and our love of construction, and our passion for that. And so this project really embodies a lot of that ethos. And in addition to being able to work with really engaging clients and contractors, the whole sort of team the project became a real sum of the parts of this team. So start with an image and an overall image of the project. It's located a really interesting position, both in Portland, but also sort of its immediate context. It's sort of located at the seam between what historically was kind of a blue-collar residential neighborhood and this Baltimore Woods Preserve, which is a nature preserve in North Portland that connects the kind of a green belt from Cathedral Park under the St. John's Bridge, which you can see in the background, all the way up to Pier Park, through a dotted landscape that has been sort of managed and handled by a group that has been over time reinstating the plantings of the preserve, pulling out invasives, planting back native trees to help kind of complete this small green belt as part of the landscape condition. And then below is the industrial park that then fronts the river. So there's just a really interesting balance of the urban and the pastoral as part of this project. But first, I'll talk about collaboration, which is something that in our practice is very key, both in the way that we we talk and sort of lead a project through the client, the contractor group, the fabricators, and then there's always a collaboration with the site. The design is always sort of a result of the attributes, either the amenities or the challenges that a site brings. And in this particular project, we got a really great group to work with. And probably the best way to talk about this project is chronologically, because we had the great fortune of having a really sort of dedicated client and the contractor at the beginning of the project. And so we were able to work as a really integrated team from the beginning, once the site was selected, and therefore able to capitalize on a lot of potential, opportunities that came along the way. And it gave us a really sort of like clear integrated approach from the design through the execution. So starting with the client, this is the client, Samantha and Eric. They are of Studio Noyes, which is really interesting. They're a young couple. They have a really thriving apparel design practice. They don't have their own labels. They work with other brands, and they sort of create apparel, footwear, eyewear, and different technical apparel for different brands, almost sort of like as a guerrilla team. And so they are the core of Studio Noyes. And since the project was completed, Eric has also started a new culinary footwear industry or product, which, as he put it, was a sort of a soft spot in the footwear industry that needed sort of a bespoke piece of footwear to solve that problem. And so they are working together as Studio Noyes. Eric has also Knees is what the footwear brand is called, and they're really dedicated to their work. And then they bring a team around them for specific projects. This is, an overview of that team and the project and kind of the work that they do. It's frenetic, it's exciting, it's very material based. And so they ended up being a really, really engaging client for this project. And then the contractor, his name is Colin Clark, and I point him out because he was along for the ride the entire project, as I mentioned, but he's kind of uniquely positioned for the sort of work that we do at Linden Brown. He was trained in fashion design, which is his educational background, and was able to sort of transition that into fitting out a lot of couture brand interiors. So he learned a really interesting, quick, and efficient way to achieve very minimal detailing and working with materials that have of a quality. And that sort of then transitioned him into focusing on furniture and then further to general contracting. So he's a very interesting partner to have in this. He has an incredible design eye. These are some examples of this furniture. And then on the right, an example of the sort of tidy woodworking that he does. And there's just an ethic and a sensibility to the way that he works and the materials he chooses to work with in his own practice. And so working with him, we were able to achieve and elevate some of the more practical or conventional details in the project to something that feels very special. So the house and studio is located in St. John's. As I mentioned, is a really, really rich community that was its own township, originally, and then got absorbed by Portland. But it has a great quality. There's the Year Inn, which is down the street, which sort of historically catered to longshoremen, and it has a grittiness, but it's really just community that have been there for a long time and have really taken a lot of pride in this place. So it was really inspiring to have a site in St. John's. And as I mentioned, it's also at the seam between the sort of urban fabric and this nature preserve stepping down to the industrial park and then ultimately to the Willamette River. You can see here this kind of green belt from Cathedral Park that meanders its way through to the nature preserve, which is also known as the Baltimore Woods Preserve, and that is directly adjacent to our site. And in our practice, we have the good fortune of being presented with really awe-inspiring sites with beautiful views, sites with wonderful trees, rocky outcroppings to sort of push off of. This site was not one of those. This site had a lot of hidden beauty, but this is the site that they bought. It had a very sort of ramshackle post-war house. It was quite small, modest in its size, and just a bit eccentric. It was idiosyncratic in a lot of different ways, and part of that is this breezeway that separates the house from this garage and shop, and the way that they bridged that breezeway was quite awkward in its original construction. And then the site behind it was not very inspiring, but it was unadulterated, which was ended up being a benefit for us. The interior of the house was very cramped, furniture in front of windows, the kitchen, many bad choices made over the years in this kitchen. But what it did have was very interestingly, it had a 9-foot floor to floor for the basement. So you got almost 8 feet clear down there, which is pretty unique. And then the basement was done in this really beautiful board form concrete, which is not atypical, but it was in really good shape. The way that the site drained over time really allowed for the preservation of these walls. They weren't leaching any moisture, and they weren't spalling. They were in quite good shape. These, as you might be able to tell, were the listing photos. This project basically went from being purchased by our client to they agreed to allow the friend of the previous owner to live in it. Once he moved out, it was demolition time. So we didn't get a lot of good sort of as-built photography, which is fine. But what's worth noting is that we did preserve this foundation in this basement and sort of use that as the fulcrum for the way that the planning of the project worked. And then another interesting sort of teammate on this project was the City of Portland inspector. The client had a really aggressive schedule because of the different sort of financing pressures they had on them. And so we were able to do this project through the field issuance remodel program that the City of Portland offers, which was great as a fast track. But we were touching enough of the project of the existing house that sort of didn't allow it to be purely a part of that program. So working with the inspector, he allowed us to frame a portion of the wall as for the future project, close out that permit, and then reopen a new permit whereby this wall is now preserved, which was incredibly gracious and creative from his side, and really unlocked a lot of possibilities, both in the schedule, the client's financing, as well as the sort of the way in which we were able to sort of start construction and then continue working on the design through construction. There's a glimpse of the project complete. One of the sort of core goals of this client was to maintain the wall of the top of wall height of the existing house, and then allow for it to loosen up as it moved from the street to the meadow. And they came to us with this idea of the gradient house. They named it, which is very rare for a client to sort of coin the project before design work has started. But we really fell in love with that as an idea and began to investigate the project with gradient as the sort of core conceptual move. And so for them, it was about this idea of going from the scale of the street to the scale of the preserve, from the urban to the pastoral. And so we sort of dug into that further, another view of the landscape or the site behind the house and its sort of pure and unadulterated state. And we would have loved to put the house in the meadow, but in lieu of that, we endeavored to pull the meadow through the site and through the massing of the house. So in sort of pivoting and thinking about the design process from concept to form and then site design, this idea of the gradient was really, really interesting to us. So we engaged fully in that. And you can see here as a view from the courtyard, there's an idea here of the spatial organization sort of pulling it apart as you go back to the back of the project. There's an idea about bringing light in. There's an idea of maintaining and respecting that top of wall as a one material, and then treating the roof and monitors as another material. And we often early in a project will engage. We love making all the way through the process, and so from the beginning of the project, it usually manifests itself in physical drawings, charcoal drawings, that then sort of translates into concept models, which then translates into physical mock-ups. And then everybody sort of through that process is learning through the use of material, which is always kind of pushing back on you. And so we began this process by thinking about how you can make gradients. What is a gradient? What is the sort of like core of that in an architectural way? There's the sort of density of line as it pulls apart. There's also density of the field as in the drawing below, that you can have sort of a diaphanous density that moves from one sort of point A to point B, as it were. And then there's also sort of, you can have multiple gradients that are passing through each other. And that became really interesting to the client, because they are bringing to us what was a very novel paradigm of bringing your work to your home. And, we couldn't have known at the time that this was going to be a question that all of us were going to be confronted with in a year and a half. But at this time, this felt very novel to us. And so we started to talk to them, to think about, what does this mean for you? Is it a situation or a relationship on the left where, the pink is sort of your life and your work and the way that you live sort of move in and out of that? Or do your work and the way that you live really sort of capture and embrace who you are, and the way that your personality and how your attitudes towards work and life are formed, and then that sort of can permeate itself out. But it's really about the kind of experience of being at your home with the working at your home, and what that means for the way that you live. And they ultimately, the image on the right was a lot more interesting to them, and I think it resonated more with them. And so we sort of backed out and started to iterate on the site, and looking at a lot of different sort of configurations of what a house and a studio can mean relative to each other. So the row on the right or on the top is the house being sort of in that position of the house now, and then bringing the studio further into the site, and then capturing a courtyard in between, and then the sort of like diaphanous tissue that would bind that, which is rendered in a clear material in these models. And then the row on the below is an L-shaped, where you're sort of capturing the court in a different way and leaving a corner open to the view, to the bridge, to the meadow. and having a relationship between the house and the studio. And in those studies, we respected the foundation of the house the most, and that in the end became what resonated the most with the client. And so we ended up in a place very similar to this, where we have the studio that sort of stretches out like an accordion bellows towards the landscape, towards the preserve, and then the house is sort of bound by the existing house footprint. And it was an idea about the site too, that, as I mentioned before, we would have loved to put the house and the studio in the preserve, but in lieu of that, we can drag the preserve through the site and let it gradiate too. So as the experience of the project becomes looser as you move from the street to the meadow, the meadow then has an opposite gradient where it gets pulled through. And by the time you're back at the street, you have a more sort of ordered and manicured landscape condition that matches and is more appropriate for the kind of street wall and adjacent properties that you have. But as you move out towards the meadow, it can loosen up and become a little bit more playful. And by doing so, we can capture sort of interior experiences that are connected implicitly to those landscape moves. So we tested that in a physical model. So these are brass plates that are billowing out, and then a model base that's made of white oak, both in edge grain and in grain conditions, that kind of flip around to bring texture to whatever that ground plane ended up being, and it sort of helps to codify where we plan for gardens and where we just have sort of native grasses roll through the project. And that all helped us sort of understand our core concept of gradient as a spatial organizer. And then we began to look at form for the project. And that's where this idea of the monitors came. Some sketches of that. So as I mentioned before, we held that top of wall line at the street, which was 8 feet above finished floor, and then maintained the same roof pitches of the existing building. But as punctuations, we sort of flew those out and created these monitors. And sometimes these monitors are for occupation, and then sometimes they are for bringing light in. The studio faces southwest, which can be quite harsh in its exposure, and so the monitors have a way of bringing light in that diffuses it, and then below the glass wall is recessed to allow for porches and eave shading on the glass. And looking at this through a diagram, with the top left being the sort of base condition, where your real avenue to bring light in is through the walls and just bringing in side light, but you don't get any top light out of that. And poking skylights on the roof seemed like it could generate some interesting lighting conditions. But again, having the contractor on board so early, we developed a construction strategy to be able to achieve these light monitors in an economical way that the budget could support. So we looked at it through the lens of gable and monitor, diagonal clerestory, which would really require that we structure almost in a truss across the diagonal of the house and studio to bring light in diagonally. And then if we were to have two opposing sheds on either end, and then the roof warping between the two, and through the analysis of that we did with the contractor and just our own intuition, the diagonal clerestory and the torque shed seemed sort of beyond the extents of the budget for the project. But this gable monitor seemed like it had a lot of potential, and we're not really losing any of the light qualities that we could get. The one thing that this diagonal clerestory did offer, though, is a light shelf that allowed the light to bounce in and therefore diffuse it and sort of spread it out and have it be less direct. And so we took a piece of that and brought it into the gable and monitor strategy. So an image of the project of these monitors sort of peeling up and becoming punctuation marks along this extruded gable form, and then a detail of the light condition coming through the ceiling. And then the sort of dialogue that we have with the site, and going back to what the client brought to us, the gradient was really a site-driven concept for them. It was about acknowledging what is working at the street, and then also acknowledging that there's a lot of opportunity as you move towards the back of the site. So this is a view from the primary bedroom deck, looking back towards the preserve, with the monitors sort of raising themselves at the studio. And then, you have porches for occupation, and then this view terrace here in the corner of the site that sort of holds it. It also this image starts to show these board form concrete planters, these frames that we brought, both, for a number of different reasons. I would say that it helps scale the site, because again, the site is nearly a double lot, so 100 by 100. It was, just under that, but it's quite a large site, and in having just as it was before, this sort of rambling, weeded lawn doesn't do a whole lot for your experience. It needed a little bit more specificity, and in doing that, we created these concrete courts that both have a lot of they're reminiscent of the board form concrete that we found at the basement of the house, but and then it also helps scale the site. But they also provide sort of stormwater planters for all the stormwater that's created by increasing the size of this development. So the studio is larger than the shop was previously. We added 12 feet onto the house, so the house is a bit larger as well. And so we were able to use these planters to run all of the stormwater through and let it filter before it returns back to the city infrastructure. It slows the water down, and created these rain gardens, and they're planted with a variety of different plants, both but mostly native. And then they're planted in a way that they are seasonal. So what we're seeing in the direct foreground is the summer garden, to the right is the fall garden, and then down below is the winter garden. So there's always some sort of planting on display throughout the year. In a sketch that is from quite early on, that starts to show the idea of the extruded gable with the punctuated monitors, and then these concrete frames that help to scale the site, bring composition to the site plan, and it brings a really interesting layered experience to the way that you move through the site. We studied that in physical model as well, which was great to kind of understand scale and proportion, both as it relates to the site, and then as the building itself works. Part of the challenge here is by sort of setting that 8-foot top of wall datum at the house, as that swings around to the studio and the land drops away. There was a lot of proportion to work through to make sure that didn't feel overly tall. And then the final site plan on the left, very close to that initial sketch, and then on the right, the landscape in its sort of late summer setting. And so you can get, as I mentioned before, you get this really rich layered experience as you're sort of circulating through the site. And then the building, which is a passion of ours, and we love to work through this, focusing on material, detail, light, and then always making sure that the connection to the site and to the landscape is valid and is successful. So this is your approach to the finished project. You can get a sense for that eave line there that matches the eave lines of the adjacent houses. the sort of the monitors in the end sort of become a revisioning of the dormer, and so there's a contextual fabric that's pulled through there. And we were very careful to bring the smaller monitors out towards the street face, and then the larger monitors face the landscape and the courtyard. This is a more elevational shot of the house. You can get a sense for the landscape being a bit more ordered. It's lower. It has a kind of a bit more of a manicured sensibility to it. The 8-foot top of wall is set, and then of course we couldn't help ourselves but punctuate here with a monitor to bring in north light. Detail of the siding system, the way windows are handled, those earlier studies and the way that the spaces sort of gradiate out was very informative to the way the material order of the perimeter wall and the exterior siding also worked. There's a metering to it, which just helped us locate windows. It gave opportunities for transparency through the building. And then also just like a really rich sense of tactility and texture. And the siding was really an engaging process to work with the contractor on. Again, he has a really good woodworking sensibility. He effectively created a wood shop on one of those concrete courtyards on the project, and milled all of the vertical metering of the siding, which is in tight knot cedar that's stained. And then the siding panels themselves are just a 1x6 V-groove tight knot cedar, pre-finished, standard color. Nothing could be more conventional about that. But the sort of tidiness of the installation, and then ultimately, this is a shot here on the upper right of before those battens were installed, and the battens then give it another layer of texture and a bit more of a sophisticated detail, the way that all is put together. An image here of being on axis with the breezeway, and again, that breezeway is the same dimension as the original house. The same corner of the house foundation is intact. We also started the studio at the same position that the old shop was started, but then had a different sort of revisioning idea around the way that the roof is handled, and having a more consistent roof as it spans over the breezeway, turns the corner, and caps the studio. On the upper right, there's a site section through that breezeway. You can really get a sense for the way that the topography of the site worked. It slopes 10 feet from front to back. And so while we were able to kind of achieve a lot of spatial volume on the interior by holding that 8-foot datum across from the house to the studio, there was just a lot of interesting study around how you grade up to the building, and sort of really modulating the monitors and the proportion, the metering of the facade, and getting all the scale and proportion to work well. And image of the final plan. So the studio here, the garage is tucked into the front facade. That's all occluded by the siding system that marches across the garage, and those doors are operable. And so when the garage doors are open, you understand it as a garage. When they're closed, it becomes stealth. Conference room in the studio, and then the main workspace with a lounge at the sort of west end of the studio facing the preserve, and which is kind of an interesting spatial experience. It's an experience where you're almost always sitting, but it's also the tallest volume, so you feel it really accentuates your experience of that. And then the house was set up on 12-foot spatial bays of the kitchen, dining room, living study, and then the primary suite here with 42-inch stair modules set in between those that helped us tuck in a powder room, as well as having enough room for the stair going down to the basement, which has another bedroom suite as well as a den, and then the stair up into the monitor. An image of your sort of the first image that you get as you walk into the house. So you're set up right on the eave line of the gable, and you can kind of understand this diaphanous layer of screening. So all of the stair railings, guardrails, and handrails are done in steel, and then the poché elements of the bathrooms are done in this maple wood paneling that has the same textural and same cadence as the siding, and the material order of the exterior siding, as well as the order of the steel as it's laid out. And an exploded axon here that shows the kind of existing house, the small addition we put on it, the concrete frames that hold the courts and scale the site, that perimeter sort of wrapper of cedar, these boxes of poché that hold the garage, in the house it holds the kitchen, the bathrooms, etc. And then in the studio there's some storage as well as kitchenettes that are incorporated there, and then that's all capped with a continuous spanning roof punctuated by the light monitors. And an image during construction of the framing here, the column the contractor comes with that sort of finish carpentry skill set, but they also self-perform all the framing, and so they're great because they have accountability from the minute sill plates are put on top of the foundation wall all the way through to the finished cabinetry. Part of the sort of elegance of the design solution of these monitors is we were able to achieve this through using these tube steel bents, which you can get a sense of here. There's a bent at the perimeter of each monitors, or adjacent to each monitor, so there's 5 total. And they allow there not to be any collar ties and allow for us not to have a truss that brings down the ceiling height, which was how the original house was built. So we could really vault the interior and then use them to help structure the monitor framing as it moves out to the edge of the exterior wall. And it was great because these bents, while they're doing so much work for us, are so dumb, and they were easy to make. These 5 bents cost about $7,000 for the project, and so with just a really interesting kind of tweak to the structural condition, we were able to achieve a really rich spatial experience at a very, very low cost to the project. At the sort of demising diaphanous screen between the living room and the primary suite is the stair. The stairs, we worked with a fabricator that we really love and work with often, and used all the off-the-shelf parts. It's 1.25 inch tube, Schedule 40 tube, the steel tube, and just worked with him to figure out how to hang the stair on one side and structure it floor to ceiling on the other side, and finding really, really interesting ways of making transitions. And this was a kind of a real boon for us, because these very beautiful sinuous transitions of the handrail are able to stay in line with the adjacent structure of the stair that the treads are structured against, but bend in and create a code compliant handrail. And this was done through the use of off-the-shelf elbows that are just welded together. And so we worked with him to find the right angles to make these transitions for these elbows. And then he welded them up and ground it smooth, and put it all together. And it's really beautiful. The finish on the stair itself is it's not powder coated, it's not painted, it's it's a patina. It's almost like a gun bluing, but this particular patina warms up the steel in a way that almost makes it look like or feel like bronze. And over time, in the areas where you touch, much like any other living finish, it'll wear and it'll get brighter in those areas where the rest of it will remain this kind of dark bronze color. And that was very beneficial for us because we love the idea of patining steel. Gun bluing does turn it quite cool and blue. And the material palette of the interior here is this warm maple floor that wraps up and creates warm maple walls. And so the whole material palette really begged for a warm metal finish here, and we were able to achieve that. The steel fabricator installed the steel, constructed the everything, and then the contractor self-performed the finish. And so we were able to work with them really, really closely to get the finish just right. And this is a view looking back from the stair to the entry. On your left in this image is where that powder room is located. It was really important, of course, for the walls not to touch the ceiling. So all walls are held at that 8-foot line so that the ceiling can really spring up from that. And we're able to tuck in a powder room here, and by using this batten metering device, it brought a lot of texture, a lot of sort of scale to the house, which felt very appropriate for the house. But it also allowed for us to integrate holes into the doors, both for the coat closet and for this powder room door. So there's no exposed hardware on the exterior face, or the outside faces of these doors. So when they're closed, they feel very very blind, as well as right behind Eric here is the refrigerator. So all of the sort of the handles, all the requirements of that refrigerator are all built into the paneling system. View out of the dining room out to the court, and then a view back in the kitchen from the primary suite out through the concrete planter to the landscape. A nice image of that stair detail that is to your right in this position. This one monitor at the primary suite is the only one for occupation. It sort of helped to add 50% to the square footage of their suite, which is quite modest in its size. It gives you incredible views from up there, and then you can also sort of get a sense for the transparency and its location from the exterior. Another detail of that. And as I mentioned before, the kind of the lesson that we learned from one of the roof studies was creating this light shelf, which helped the interior light condition greatly, but it also provides shading for the glass of the sliding glass doors from the studio out to the sort of captured court terrace. So in the summer months, that glass can remain shaded, and then there's always sort of an ambient diffused light in the interior. There's a view of the sort of walking into the studio workspace. You get a sense for that porch to your left, and then the wall of glass out to the preserve. Some images of construction from that framing. You can kind of see that bent that's buried in there. The guys took their exterior wood shop and made it an interior wood shop, and really just built the project from the inside out. And they did all the paneling on site, as well as most of the cabinetry. So it was really great, that sort of connection with them, working through it and managing the details. The paneling in the studio is a little bit looser. It has less battens, less texture. It feels more appropriate for the workspace. And then we were able to sort of do a customized peg wall here, so they can use it for display of their product, for using for presentations, And it's quite adaptable for all different types of uses. You can see them using the pegs to stand things on or put shelves on, or even to hang climbing shoes from. And on the left, an image of the lounge with, where you are at your highest point. The studio has 3 different 18-inch steps, and so it drops 4.5 feet from front to back, and it sort of all integrates into a poured concrete slab, and then a detail of that lounge space looking out towards the sort of the fence, effectively that is the barrier between the site and the preserve. We did that in a gabion wall using local basalt as filler. And the goal there was that when you're looking out from the studio, you don't really understand there to be a barrier. We brought the grade up from the meadow side. There's a much taller barrier there, just to keep people honest. Detail of the conference room on your left, and then a look back. You can sort of see the way that the studio steps up as it moves from the lounge to the workspace to the conference room, and then ultimately to the entry. An image looking from the corner back to the wrapping house and studio, as it sort of holds that landscape, and then those concrete planters. These images were taken when the landscape was quite young. It's very mature now, which is very exciting for us. And an image from the meadow looking through that gabion wall, and then back to the house and the studio on your left. And then the project in context, again, we have always sort of held that goal of the clients very dear, and wanted a very different experience of the project from the street side versus the nature preserve side. So you can get a sense for the sort of the fabric of the houses across the street. We kept everything low, took advantage of the site dropping down, as to preserve the views of the neighbors up the hill. And getting a sense for the way that the siding helps to, or the window configuration sort of shows the spatial configuration of these spaces sort of billowing out as you move out toward the meadow, and then the landscape courts themselves. So with that, I thank everybody again, and I'll turn it back over for any questions from you.
Hey, Chris, this is Jim Satzinger in Bend. Congratulations. This was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And your story, from images of pattern to massing to detailed material and connections, so relevant and so beautifully explained. I think these design programs have been wonderful this year, and I'd really like to see more. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jim. That's wonderful. Thanks for those kind words, and your understanding of the project. It means a lot.
I will tell you, Jim, that you're going to see more than you even ever wanted, because everybody wanted to schedule theirs at the end of the year. So as we get closer to December, it's going to be more and more of these.
No other questions or comments yet? This was a really interesting, again, it's from my seat, it's nice to see, because I heard a lot of these comments, honestly, from the jurors on the other side, but they teased it out from seeing the photos and reading the description, what must have happened here. And then to hear the story match up so closely actually is very, it's encouraging, and it gives me a lot of faith in our juries that they do a lot of intense thought, quite frankly, on what they see. So that's just encouraging all around. Also, their business looks to be thriving, I hope, in this neighborhood. I wonder if that's, do you have any feedback from them on how this project has impacted their business?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. They have been, as I mentioned before, sort of right as this project was completing and they were moving in, Eric launched the Mies brand, and they have, the feedback has been great because, as I sort of mentioned early on, with the way in which there's a real blurry line between their life and their work. And so the house, we tried to give them this threshold to leave the house and then enter your studio, so you have a sense of moving from one thing to the next. But because this project completed during the pandemic, and so it was very odd. They had to sort of sort out a lot, as we all did. They had this kind of interesting project to test fit themselves within. But the feedback that we've gotten is that they bring teams to the studio, which is really, really great. They love working in the studio, but sometimes they'll break out if they need just some quiet moments. They'll break out to their house, or they'll bring a couple members of the team to the house, and then they'll just jam on the couches in the living room. And so they really have kind of embodied that diagram of letting the way that they live blur kind of between the strict sort of envelope of the studio and the house, which is really exciting for us. They're finding all different kinds of workspaces within the project.
I also think that we should make a bigger effort, in lieu of the fact that not as many people are attending as should attend. We should have 50 at this presentation, that we really try to promote the videos that are available at our website, so more people can watch this. Just like the OPSIS program was equally great. These were the two best this year, I think.
Hey, Chris, this is Dave Pugh. I just had a question or a couple of questions about the stairs, and are they pretty solid? Do they move much at all?
Yeah, this is great. This is a great question, because our structural engineer, who we've been working with forever, we have a great relationship with them. They are always worried about this, the bounce of the stair. We're consistently sort of pushing the kind of structural resolution of these feature stairs, and so this one was no different, and it is remarkably stiff. And I think what we learned is that because the one side does span from floor to ceiling, and then those the way that the steel connections interface with the treads almost, they really do kind of provide a really stiff lateral stability to it racking it all. And so when you're moving up it, you don't really, because it's not moving that high, by the time you get moving on it and there's some resonant energy, you're almost halfway, you're more than halfway up the stair, and then you've now gotten more connection points around you. And so it worked out really, really, really beautifully. It was, we really appreciate that kind of level of wabi-sabi in the design process, to kind of, you have some intuition, the engineer has looked at it, but there's just kind of a level of faith that you bring as a group to it. And then in this case, it functions really, really well.
Your detailing is unbelievably exquisite, and that really makes any project, and just working out all that stuff. I had a question. I can't really remember. I think it's on the front elevation adjacent to the kitchen, and there's a panel that's fairly flat and doesn't have like the battens. And I'm wondering what's going on there, or it might be below the window, actually.
Yeah, it's adjacent to it. Yeah, actually, I didn't include that, the sketch of that elevation in this little study, but I'll get to that.
There was a picture, right there, right below the monitor.
Yeah, so in a sense, it's really a compositional move to, it's a gesture to the other houses on the street have these more horizontally proportioned windows, and then the scheme itself really kind of
Beautiful.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Well, we're at 6 now, so if there's no other questions, I want to thank Chris for this lovely presentation. This house is amazing. And thank you everyone for showing up.
Yeah, thank you everyone. It was a pleasure to share it.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.